Welcome back to DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast, and a special episode this week as we have two races to reflect on at the brilliant Iowa Speedway, full of action, brilliant oval racing, and we got two bouts of it. The two bouts were dominated by one man, Josef Newgarden. I think we all saw this coming, but it does not take away from the achievement of what he's done up.
Oh, it's a massive achievement. I mean, Iowa is a brilliant weekend. It's the most important weekend of the season, being a doubleheader, and there's so many challenges for the drivers, and it makes for a really exhilarating weekend. And I think those challenges really, just outline what an impressive job Newgarden does around that place. I mean, you look at qualifying, you have 2 laps, the pressure's on immediately. He didn't have the finest qualifying actually, but he did the job he needed to, and then you get into the race and tyre degradation is such a big factor. Strategy comes into play, and you have a lot of cars traveling at different speeds. There's constantly something for even the race leader to contend with in terms of, are the faster cars trying to unlap themselves behind? Are the slower cars ahead that they're trying to lap? And you have to take so many different lines to try and pass those cars, and adding to that, it's such a physical challenge. There's so much management to go into it. I mean, James Hinchcliffe often mentioned on the broadcast that drivers are holding their breath for most of the lap because the G-forces are so great. They have to even time their breaths, and the lap is below 20 seconds. The margins are so fine, and Newgarden just time and time again manages to execute with the utmost precision and just wipe the floor. Really, it was a story of Penske prominence all weekend, and Newgarden was the one to reign supreme. It's almost feels like greatness unfolding before our eyes. It's something really, really special.
Yeah, and I think the oval tracks are the harder as well in a way, because if it was in a street race or anything, they can slightly be off, but I think in an oval track, if you slightly go out of your line, then you can end up in a wall, which happened to multiple drivers. It's like the margins are so small that just even the slightest knock, you never know where you're gonna go, and it could either go into another driver or it could go into the wall again. And it's definitely like a difficult track and difficult circuit to kind of go around. It doesn't seem it, but obviously when you're in the car, and going at the high speeds, it's very difficult to do.
Yeah, and as you say, the lap is below a mile, the track, and for Penske to time and time again just completely nail their setups. I mean, you look at qualifying, they qualified 1, 2, 3 for the first race, 1, 2, 7 for the second. Power and McLaughlin heading the field for both races. And there was no one really close. They barely had any challenges, all weekend, and it marked quite an upturn for Penske relative to where they've been this season. They've been quite inconsistent, especially, lacking qualifying pace, but their cars just look remarkable. It was, I think, rightly likened to almost like sports car racing, where there were different classes because those Penske cars were in just a completely different category this weekend. It was like IndyCar racing against Indy Next cars. It was quite something. And even when they battled each other, they still maintained this pace that was just so much better than the entirety of the rest of the field. And Newgarden, I think it just emphasized the edge that he has on every other driver on these tracks, that even up against his teammates in the race, he was so imperious. And I think the second race was probably the most impressive, coming from 7th, and by before lap 30 he was up into 3rd and on the back of his teammates, and then it was lap 31 he was passing both of his teammates in the same corner, and I think that was a quite remarkable move. But it's just the way Newgarden can, he can weave through the traffic so effortlessly, and you had the likes of, in the second race, Felix Rosenqvist, taking the charge to him, yet Newgarden was just able to extend the gap because he was so much more effective getting through the slower cars. And yeah, he's just doing remarkable things. I mean, it's 5 oval wins on the bounce now. Only AJ Foyt and Alan Cecilia have managed that many oval victories in a row. I think he's won the last, 8 of the last 10, I think it is. I mean, 6 wins at Iowa now. He's up to 29 career victories. 15 of them have now been on ovals, so over half, and he's really proving himself to be the king of ovals.
Yeah, definitely. I think the pace as well, like this weekend, as you said, for the whole team, but also for Newgarden, I don't know, it's one of the things of like IndyCar. It's you can be really good at ovals, and sometimes it won't translate into street tracks and everything like that. But then when it comes to something like ovals where they do really well, it's just nice to see the drivers like I don't know, be good at it. And that sounds I'm not wording that correctly, but it's very nice so that they can prove that. But yeah, they may not do well on kind of one circuit or one type of track, but then they can do so well on like ovals, and it's really nice to be able to see that from him and coming from like Penske as well, because the season has been it's probably not been what some people would predict it to be.
Yeah, I think you really can't overemphasize how impressive what they did was. I think it's telling in the first race that after qualifying, it goes into parc fermé conditions. You can't change your car. Yet Penske still had the fastest qualifying car while still having the completely superior race car as well. I mean, you look at the margins to their drivers when they're at the front of the field for most of the time. It was very, very sizable. And you look at the likes of, I think Alexander Rossi stands out for me as one where he didn't have a great qualifying. He managed to recover well. I think Kyle Kirkwood another, this being the first race. Yet Penske managed to have their drivers qualify at the front and then able to just stay at the front, which it was quite an achievement. I mean, what they have done this weekend and what Newgarden's done, it's really, really special, as I've said already.
Unpredictable, we find IndyCar, but I don't think we've ever had a weekend where someone's come into the weekend as such a favourite as Newgarden was. It's almost like Verstappen-esque in F1. You pretty much know the result before the race is over, and for that to happen in IndyCar is just a testament not only to Newgarden but to Penske and just his general form at Iowa and even ovals. And it just takes your breath away. We've never seen anything like this. We call him the king of short ovals, but he really is. He literally looks unbeatable. I mean, obviously he didn't win here last year, but that's only because he crashed out for the lead from no fault of his own. Last short oval he didn't win. Other than that, you're looking back at 2020 Iowa. I mean, just incredible. What else can you say about him?
Yeah, I mean, he could feasibly have 5 consecutive wins at Iowa if because it's an anomaly last year. So he was probably going to go and win that race before his suspension failed, I think it was. And I think he's had 11 career wins on short ovals for Gateway, then 6 at Iowa, of course. It's so impressive that time and time again he can just pull out these results and just completely school the field. And as you said, you rarely get such a foregone conclusion in sport, and especially in IndyCar with it being such a competitive series. It just speaks to Newgarden really being one of the greatest on this type of track.
And also, not only just for Newgarden, I mean, he's done fantastic, but like we said, just for the whole like Penske as well. And Will Power, he managed to stay towards the top, I think. And he came from pole to second, which may not be good from a driver point of view, but coming from the team point of view, as it's like a 1-2, it's just fantastic that they've managed to kind of convert this and, like I said, stay at the front. I think it's kind of hard to do that sometimes, of converting, like you qualifying into the race, and the whole team has just done fantastic. I think it just really speaks to how kind of like great that they are as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at Will Power's qualifying. I mean, he absolutely blew the field out of the water. He was more or less 3 miles per hour quicker on both runs at the time that he ran, and neither of his teammates could really get near him. He had, I think, 2 181 mile per hour laps. He improved on his second lap, and that car looks incredible throughout qualifying. There were no real lifts. He it still seemed disappointed as well, which was quite ominous, and it did, it proved that Penske, they went even further in the races. I think Power maybe had some issues. I think he seemed to struggle a bit later in stints. I think, obviously he managed to finish second in the second race, but he maybe seems to have the least pace out of the Penskes in the races. I think, he did seem to have a bit more drop off than the others. He glanced the wall in the first race, which, it didn't do him any good. And he might have been slightly disappointed after the first race, but I don't think he could really complain with second in the second, because obviously Newgarden is such a force. And I think McLaughlin was kind of the same after the first race. And Newgarden was actually annoyed after the first race. He was complaining at lap traffic, said that he was going to fence any drivers who were mirror blocking, which became quite an issue actually over the weekend, which maybe we'll get onto when we speak about some other drivers. And McLaughlin had said he'd actually sat down with Newgarden during the week and they'd gone through some tape of some old Iowa races. They were, Newgarden was kind of educating him, but still, even educating him, and he educated him well, clearly, because McLaughlin made some more strides forward in terms of his oval form. Even with that considered, McLaughlin still couldn't get. Well, he got near him. He did challenge him at times, but he couldn't, completely challenge him for the win. But it was a good weekend for Scott McLaughlin, actually. I feel like, as I said, he was maybe had the edge on Power in the races. He was obviously qualified second. That's 2 more front rows for him. I think it's his third and fourth front rows this season. And yeah, he was obviously still. Well, he says he's still learning, and it's only his third year. It's easy to forget. It's his third year of racing on ovals, and he had a tough end to the second race. He dropped like a stone after that late restart, but he was thankfully the last driver on the lead lap, so he managed to hold on to a top 5, and I think he actually did quite an impressive job not to crash. But yeah, he was still beaming with happiness after both races. I think that's something that makes him so likable. He clearly just absolutely loves what he's doing, and he loves racing in IndyCar. And I think this weekend was really good for him, and I think he's getting there. He's getting there in terms of challenging Newgarden. I think he nearly brought the fight to him at Gateway last year, so he's got one more opportunity this year to try and prevent Newgarden from doing the sweep of the year, which would be quite something. I mean, got some stats about Newgarden. He's led 1,847 laps in the last 11 races at Iowa. The next closest is Will Power with 351, which is only 10 more laps than Newgarden led in 2023, which is quite something over that 11 race period. Newgarden, since 2014, which was his third race at Iowa, taking away the failure of last year, the mechanical failure in the second race, because that is an anomaly. He's got an average finishing position of 2.2, which across 11 races is quite spectacular. I mean, there's no shame in his teammates falling short to that.
I mean, just going back on to Scott McLaughlin, let's not forget he was actually at the end of race 1. There was a bit of a moment where we were slightly on the edge of our seats. Obviously, Newgarden was still in the lead, but he got a bit of traffic issues towards the end, and there was kind of 10 laps to go. McLaughlin to win this, but even right from the offset, I think it was his second race in IndyCar. He came second at Texas, and his overform is definitely an underrated characteristic of him, and he's probably got 2 of the best oval drivers to learn from.
I don't think any other team really managed to nail it in the way Penske did. It was the fact that they got it so perfect, and even the well-oiled operations like Ganassi, who are really regarded the strongest team in the series at the moment, just couldn't really even get close to them. I mean, no other team had that same level of consistency, but yeah, Ganassi were probably the closest. I think. Actually, I feel like Marcus Ericsson had a really good weekend. That it's, we often speak about him being quite quiet in races and just picking results up, but I think he was one of the flashiest drivers this weekend. He's turning into a bit of an oval specialist. He's, on the starts and the restarts, he looked extremely racy, and Yeah, I mean, he picked up a fourth and then second race finished ninth, which was a bit disappointing in the end, but he gave some fireworks for us. I think Dixon as well, he finished sixth in both races. He was the closest challenger to the Penskes at times. But yeah, in the end, it was actually Alex Palou who in the second race was, the guy who managed to reign supreme out of the rest of the field, which was really impressive because this is, it's widely documented. This is Palou's weakest type of track. He's not had the greatest results on short ovals yet. He had a quiet first race. He finished eighth, which was kind of just damage limitation. He finished a lap down, which obviously is no shame in that here with it being such a short lap. But that now actually means no driver has finished all laps this season. But he ensured that was not to be the case again in the second race. And to finish third, I mean, that's more than damage limitation in the scheme of things from, what we maybe expected coming into the weekend. I think 2 top 10s would have been taken for Palou. But yeah, it was a much more accomplished short oval drive.
Race 2 in particular, he kind of just seemed to pop out of nowhere, really. Quite a race, and suddenly he's appeared in P3. And I think this weekend, although obviously Newgarden was brilliant, maybe Palou just still has enough of a gap. He's got an 80-point gap, which is basically a race within a half. I think Nashville in 2 weeks' time will probably be the deciding factor. So we know how crazy it can be, and it's impossible to predict Nashville. So that's probably going to be the one which decides it. I think this weekend give him the sufficient gap he needs for the championship.
Yeah, I mean Nashville is a lottery, of course, but you've got Gateway coming up. There's every chance Newgarden goes and wins there again. But as long as Palou can, maybe pick up a top 10, I think that's all fine. As you say, a lot does hang on Nashville. If Palou, say, has an early DNF or something, then that could change the game if Newgarden finishes well. But the gap does seem still completely insurmountable, and that's credit to what Palou has done on the road and street courses where Newgarden hasn't been the most consistent. And yeah, I mean, Palou wasn't really the standout Ganassi all weekend, I felt. I mean, I always felt that Dixon and Ericsson were the ones who were the closest challengers to the Penskes, if in terms of who got closest to remotely challenging them, because there wasn't really much of a challenge. But yeah, it was very Palou just to pop up there, as you said. He was quiet all weekend, I would have said, but yeah, to just pop up third, it's really impressive. And I think Takuma Sato was disappointing, I would say. He finished in the top 10 in the first race, but clipped the wall, and that put him out of contention in the second. And that comes after a sort of mediocre, not bad, not great Indy 500, crashed out of Texas as well. I think they maybe would have expected more from him on the ovals, but yeah, I mean, Ganassi can't have many complaints because of the season they've had. Iowa is just the home of Penske, really.
Ganassi haven't typically been strong at ovals outside the Indy 500 for a couple of seasons now, and I think Sato's an interesting point because he was brought in for this oval experience, and obviously the point system actually works towards the car and not the driver, which is why Sato's brought in to have these results. And to be honest, they haven't been that impressive. Yeah, quite a day for him, and a slightly disappointing season. He's obviously got one race to go. Gateway, a track he's won at before, but we'll have to see what happens there.
Yeah, I think at the beginning of one of the earlier episodes, I think I said something about him saying that he was going to do really well at something, and it's just he hasn't really lived up to my expectations. I guess he's doing all right, but I think for him to be in a big team like Ganassi, I feel like he has the expectation of performing better than he has. I mean, the first race he did okay, but the second race there wasn't much of him at all, and I don't know. I think the Ganassi may think about bringing him on next year. They may debate it, they may not. I just think the results that he's been getting should be a little bit better considering the team that he's in. But
maybe the most disappointed team will be McLaren. Saw such opportunity, played really well here last year. It's a weird weekend because in race one he actually looked like he could challenge the Penskes. He obviously finished third in the end, but he was on the pace of certainly McLaughlin and Power. Maybe not on the same level as Newgarden, but he was still pretty impressive in race one, and he was pretty optimistic going into Sunday. And then his car on Sunday looked horrendous. Every time we were riding on board with him, he looked like he was going to hit the wall. His car was loose out of everywhere. And he actually said it's a victory that we didn't hit the barrier, which kind of says how bad his car was on Sunday. I don't know what happened overnight, but late on in the stints, he was holding on for dear life.
Yeah, it was a bizarre weekend of massive fluctuations within the team. O'Ward qualified fairly well. The other two didn't qualify well at all. O'Ward had a strong first race. He finished on the podium when Power had his little moment and didn't manage to recover from that. So yeah, that was a solid day from O'Ward. Obviously couldn't get close to the Penskes, but who could, as we have already said. But yeah, second race for O'Ward was a very, very poor one. I think he was a bit mystified. He sounded quite deflated in his post-race interview. He's dropped down to 6th in the championship now, which is, that's a big disappointment after what could very easily have been 2 successive wins at the start of the season. He's still without a win. It just seemed he couldn't hold on to his tyres at all. He was coming in for pit stops earlier than he should have done, and just whenever the cameras cut to him, he always looked like he was on the verge of crashing, really. His car just looked like it was he was just fighting it constantly, and he was downbeat. He was just baffled by it all, really. And I think the other two, Rossi recovered well in the first race. He had a very disappointing second race. I think he finished 15th in the end, which we wouldn't have been happy with. He was quite excited going into the weekend. I think he was looking forward to it because of the package that he hoped they'd have off, what they've had in the past. I think Rosenqvist was, he impressed in the second race. He, again, lacked qualifying pace, which is a difference to what he's had on the ovals for, the super speedways for most of this year. And he made similar gains to Rossi in the early parts of the second race, but where Rossi dropped back, Rosenqvist kind of just appeared up front and all of a sudden was right on the tail of Josef Newgarden, which was a remarkable sight, really. He did come from nowhere, and I think people were shocked after the race even to hear that he finished 4th after it was a bit of a disappointing restart, and it's kind of testament to the recovery he had in the first place that he was actually disappointed with finishing 4th. It was a great drive, and aside from Newgarden, arguably drive of the weekend, I think, from Rosenqvist to finish 4th in that second race.
Yeah. As you said, simply to Palou, he kind of just came out of nowhere. It seemed like he was slightly off strategy, and he just appeared in second. And there was even a moment he was looking at Newgarden for the lead, and it's slightly disappointing for Rosenqvist because it felt like maybe a slight opportunity missed, which is testament to how well he drove. But he's at risk, and he's putting on a good audition. If any teams want to look at him, he's had some good performances on road and streets. Also can perform ovals, whether that's at Indianapolis or on the other end of the spectrum, somewhere like Iowa. It's a very, very impressive performance of Rosenqvist. And as I said, it's a remarkable performance, and I actually feel a bit sorry for him because he definitely deserved more than what he got out of the weekend.
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed the moment where Rosenqvist was in pursuit of Newgarden. Obviously, it's enjoyable because of the leader, the supreme driver on this track is being challenged, but actually because it also showed where Newgarden's so good, because while Newgarden was just weaving his way through traffic effortlessly, that's where Rosenqvist kind of got a bit caught out when he was in pursuit of Newgarden and dropped back quite a fair amount. I think it got to like 5 seconds in the end, just because he wasn't having the same joy getting past traffic. And to keep singing Penske's praises and Newgarden's praises, I think that was where it really showed, there in the flesh, what makes Newgarden so good, because he was just, traffic is arguably the biggest factor, traffic, tyre degradation. And just the way Newgarden dealt with the traffic was unbelievable compared to Rosenqvist, who on the day was arguably the second best driver. Yet he was still noticeably, struggling a lot more than Newgarden.
I think McLaren will come out of this weekend saying it's a mission to take them. They haven't won a race this year. It's quite amazing to say that because they've been so strong at so many events, but they just haven't got it together. And Iowa's a track they've gone so well. Like, yes, Penske were always going to be the favourites here, but it's still a good chance for them. You kind of look at the options they've got left at the end of the year, and there isn't any particular track they've gone up too well at. Obviously, they might look at the Indy Road Course favourably, and even Nashville, but it's disappointing for McLaren because they just can't get done. I'm most frustrated because in the first 7-8 races, there were so many opportunities missed. If you look back at obviously St. Peter, Texas, but somewhere like Detroit, Long Beach, into the Indy 500, and it's frustrating for McLaren because it's not a good look if they're going to go win the season and they've got the defending champion coming into them. It's frustrating, as I said, and I think they need to look at what is going wrong and why they can't challenge Ganassi on the road or Penske on the ovals, because they have done in previous years. It's just they don't seem to be the quickest on any given weekend.
Yeah, and time is running out now. I mean, you go into the Iowa weekend, there's 7 races left. You exit the Iowa weekend, all of a sudden, there's only 5 races left, and it really feels like we're getting to the business end now. There's a lot of drivers who will have been, tipped to win races, desperate to win races that, will end up not winning races because you look, Alex Palou's won 4, Newgarden's now won 4 races, which, to see Palou's lead kind of speaks to his just superior consistency, doesn't it, really? But yeah, we're getting towards the end now, and McLaren, yeah, it's not been the greatest season for them, I think, in the grand scheme of things.
I mean, as you said, we are running out of time, and you look at the list of drivers who still haven't run a race. Scott Dixon hasn't won a race. Will Patrick Colton Herder hasn't run a race, and they're probably more of the problem. You look at someone like Romain Grosjean, who missed loads of opportunities at the start of the year. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And it's testament to the dominance of Palou on Road Street and the dominance of Newgarden Novels this year. That some great drivers haven't had opportunities. I mean, you look at Scott Dixon. He's finished in the top 7 every race apart from Long Beach, which he would have finished in the top 7, and yet he still hasn't won a race because of the dominance of these two. It's just really incredible to see. I've only got 5 races left. Obviously, these will be slightly different because Nashville is Nashville. Gateway is probably going to go back into Newgarden, but Portland, Laguna, and Indy. Obviously, Palou has won all three of those tracks. They tend to be a bit more random, so I'll see how it plans out. But yeah, I mean, the dominance of those two has been staggering.
And I think it shows the dominance of Palou as well, because if you think about, he doesn't even have to necessarily win like all the races. He just has to make sure that he finishes in like the top 10 or top 6 or something. Because as long as he finishes ahead of Josef Newgarden, or is it Dixon that's next, as long as he just finishes ahead of them, I think all the consistency and all the winning that he's done earlier on just really secures the championship. Like, there isn't, unless he crashes out, unless he gets disqualified or something, there is not much that they can do to kind of stop him. They have to necessarily win the races, and they have to finish ahead of him in all the ones that are left. So it's going to be a lot of kind of pressure on them as well. He's just secured it straight from not the beginning, but he secured it in the last couple of races, and he's just done so well. And to be able to have that advantage, and to have that advantage now, it just shows how good of a driver. I don't know how else to say it. He's just been unstoppable. He's done amazing. There's no other words for it, really.
Yeah, I mean, we said this before, but you sort of run out of superlatives of someone like Alex Palou, and I won't touch them too much because we already have mentioned it, but yet again, he exceeded expectations the weekend, and I think that was the biggest target for him. Coming into a track he's not good at. He still pulled the result out the bag like he does at every single race he goes to.
Yeah, and I think it's testament to what an impressive job he's doing this season, that even at tracks where he's not expected to perform as well, he can perform better than expected. I mean, it's just remarkable, isn't it, really? We're watching something quite incredible.
I think we'll move on to Andretti. Disappointing weekend, I think, for Andretti. I mean, there were some highlights. Carl Kirkwood was very strong in race 1. Colton Herta was pretty strong in race 2. They both finished 7th, but overall still seem to be Andretti's weakness.
Yeah, I actually felt a bit for Colton Herta because he had a strong qualifying. I think, did he qualify 5th and 6th? But he had a very slow stop early on in the first race. I think it was 43 seconds. There was some issue with the wheel gun or the wheel nut, which, that ruined his race pretty much. He finished 19th in the end, which, whatever for him really, he won't care with that result. And then, he had a better second race, but 7th is solid, but it's not exactly what you'd want. I think Kirkwood was probably the other to catch the eye out of the Andretti's. He didn't have speed in qualifying, which was disappointing for him, but in the first race he was the strongest Andretti. It was another outstanding recovery drive. Again, it just emphasises his racecraft on different tracks as well, because he's managed to recover through the field on all sorts of different tracks when some sort of issue or misfortune or even just poor performance in qualifying like this weekend puts him further back in the pack. So to move from 17th to 7th was really solid in the first race. Then he recovered well in the second race as well. I think for large parts of it he finished 11th in the end, which wasn't quite as standout as his first race, but it's not awful, but it's not the weekend that Andretti will want, because at the end of the day they want to be fighting for the win, don't they?
I mean, I think one positive that someone will take, believe it or not, is Romain Grosjean, because we went in quite hard on Romain Grosjean last week, and he kept it clean. He finished both races, and that's something similar again. His performances were both still outside the top 10. He still only had 2, and you're looking back at Alabama for the last one. But it's small steps, but it shows he can go a race without crashing.
Yeah, I think the word I'd use to sum up Grosjean's weekend would be quiet. He did have a good qualifying, to be fair, and in terms of the first race, I think he qualified 8th, but maybe a quiet weekend was what Grosjean needed. Just a quiet weekend where he doesn't make any errors, he just gets through it, he finishes 2 races. That would be something for his confidence. Again, it's not necessarily a good result or an outstanding result to boost his confidence as such, but 11th, 12th, not exceptional, decent, didn't make any errors, any dramatic errors, so positive strides, albeit not massive positive strides.
Yeah. And I would also want to touch on Carl Kirkwood, because he's actually impressed me on the ovals this year, particularly compared to his teammates. He was running very well at Indy until the incident with Rosenqvist. He was the best qualifier at Indy for Andretti. Texas obviously didn't go the way he wanted, but Iowa, I'd say he was the strongest Andretti of this weekend. Overall performance is something I like Carl Kirkwood last year. I appreciate it was an AJ Foyt, but this year he's proved better than his teammates, which is all you can ask for.
Yeah, I mean he's living up to the expectations that he came in with when he was the dominant Indy Lights champion in 2021, and came in with a lot of expectation, albeit moved to Foyt, who were not the strongest team, but pick up kind of where he left off in 2021. On ovals, especially to be performing this well, somewhere that he maybe struggled a bit more last year. It is impressive, and I think he's living up to his potential. As Andretti have been disappointing, but I think we've seen a lot of positives from Kirkwood this year to suggest that, you can probably start to put him in that bracket with Herta in years to come. So Kyle Kirkwood may have impressed, in terms of his performance, but he didn't impress some drivers. I mean, Felix Rosenqvist came out and told the media after the race that, effectively he drove like an idiot. And that was kind of in agreement with something that Josef Newgarden was saying post-race when he actually wasn't that overjoyed after his first win, more frustrated at the fact that, the lapped cars or cars that he was coming up to lap, weren't necessarily showing the greatest etiquette. And while Newgarden never explicitly mentioned any names, it seemed to be aimed at Kirkwood predominantly because there was one, I think there was one moment between them, and that was when Newgarden then came out with the comments saying that, if drivers continue to mirror block him, he would fence them basically, and just basically punish them for what they were doing, because at the end of the day, it's poor etiquette, and it can ruin races, and it can be dangerous if you are a leader coming up faster to a lapped car, and it can be dangerous, the closing speeds on an oval like this. And Rosenqvist clearly shared that sentiment. I think there were some drivers that said, "Oh no, this wasn't an issue," but Rosenqvist, Newgarden, they are two drivers who, we were fighting up near the front of the field at times in the weekend on the lead lap, and Newgarden knows what he's talking about as well on tracks like this, and I don't know what they can do about it, but it did seem Kirkwood was a particular culprit of this whole mirror blocking and, cutting off the leaders. So yeah, that was one taint on a pretty strong weekend for Kirkwood.
Yeah, it's becoming a bit of an issue, actually. I think Newgarden touched on this a couple of races ago, but drivers are so desperate to stay on the lead lap that we are having incidents like this, which is becoming a bit of an issue because drivers are going more aggressive with the leaders just because they do so desperately want to stay on the crucial lead lap. And I get it. If you're a driver, you want to stay lap for a caution comes out, you're fine. But if you do get lapped and then the caution comes out, you have that issue. But at what point do you draw a line where actually this is a bit dangerous? It's a tough balance, and you see why drivers are so desperate to hang on to the lap. But at the same time, one day an accident will happen, and then what happens when an accident happens? So it's definitely something that I think the drivers need to discuss internally and find a solution. Because we don't want ever so leaders being crashed out because the drivers want us to defend their lead lap.
Yeah, I think there were too many occasions where Newgarden was close to contact with drivers that he wasn't fighting for position. I can see why he was so annoyed. I mean, there's quite a funny moment where I was going to say Victory Lane, but they actually pulled up on the grid, didn't they, after the races, where Newgarden got out of his car, McLaughlin got out of his car, obviously going congratulate Newgarden. He was beaming, smiling, happy with his P2. Newgarden just looked glum, and McLaughlin went up to him, overjoyed, and then he was like, "What's wrong?" And then Newgarden unleashed, and there was a swear words caught on the broadcast that obviously they had to apologise for. But yeah, I understand his frustrations here. I know it may seem extreme to be saying, "Oh, our fence drivers who are doing this whole mirror blocking thing," but you can understand it. I don't think he actually would fence them and ruin his own race for something that other drivers are doing. But yeah, I think something needs to be done about it.
I think on a track though that's that short, there's not that much to do because I think most people got lapped at the end or something. So it's a track that's small. It's going to be difficult to kind of come to a conclusion of that. It's like maybe it's just something that the ones are going to need to talk about internally, but it's also in a track that's kind of that's like strategical or whatever, where if you like slightly move off, you can go into a wall. I don't know. I don't know. It's definitely something they need to talk about, but I think it's also one of them things where maybe they're not meaning to, but because of the track, it's what's becoming the issue. But it has happened a lot recently in the last couple of races as well. But
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to manage on short ovals at the end of the day because, I mean, traffic is something that makes them so exciting because there's always some sort of battle going on or some sort of pass having to happen. You know, you've got well over 1,000 overtakes in each race. Obviously, not all for position, but it might come down to at the end of the day driver etiquette and just they have a discussion between the drivers and just a clamp down on it because it can't continue. It's not it's not right that leaders are put in that peril by cars that they aren't fighting for position.
They did at the end do something about it though, didn't they? They disqualified.
Pedersen.
Yeah, Pedersen. Sorry, because he was like too far behind or something, wasn't it? He
Yeah,
wasn't at competitive speed or something.
yeah, he wasn't fast enough basically, which was quite damning. And maybe when we come on to Foyt, we'll talk more about their underperformance. But yeah, that's quite damning that their cars were that slow. That poor Benjamin Pedersen in his first weekend racing on a short oval in IndyCar got parked for not being fast enough. Yeah, that's not great.
My preview for this race, and that team was McLaren and Lanigan Racing. Their road and street course was obviously picked up, and the big question was how would it translate to the oval? Lundgaard obviously dominating Toronto last time out, and we know how tragic that oval form's been. I'd say overall this weekend, it has improved. Don't get me wrong, it is still quite in a bad state, particularly when you look at Graham Rahal's side of the garage, but they've taken a slight step up. Lundgaard was 13th in race 2, for example. I'm pretty sure Harvey qualified quite well. So it's not perfect, but it's a small step to Rahal, and I think that's exactly what they need on these sort of ovals.
Yeah, it was better, not great. I mean, when you compare it though to their super speedway form, it was still quite a stride forward. I mean, they showed decent qualifying pace, but then you never felt they were quite in the window for the races. I mean, Graham Rahal actually had one really good qualifying lap. His second lap was good enough to start 6th in the second race, but I mean, he was quite upset with his car after crashing out and causing the only caution. What was quite a clean race, clean first race, which actually having so few cautions is credit to the drivers for how impressive a job they are doing, traveling at such speeds and through traffic and avoiding collisions. But yeah, Rahal said it was the worst car he's ever driven on an oval, which said something after how bad his Indy 500 car was. So, maybe that suggested they compromised the race setup a bit too much, to achieve a better qualifying. Not sure, that's only speculation. But yeah, the car looked improved in the second race. They were running inside the top 10 on Rahal's side for a bit, but he ended up finishing 20th, which, when all said and done, that's disappointing. I think then you look at Lundgaard, he didn't have a great weekend. Obviously coming off the back of a win, it's not what he would have wanted, especially being in the high V car. He finished 20th in the first race after a poor qualifying, which wasn't great. He finished 13th in the second race, which is pretty decent. You have to say. Jack Harvey then was he was in the ballpark of his teammates this weekend, but again 18th, 19th, not great. Some of his best finishes of the season, but that's kind of speaks to how poor his season's been.
But, there's still a long way to go to recover for Rahal. We'll move on to, let's go to Hungos Racing. A pretty quiet weekend. Wasn't too bad actually, finished 14th, but I'd say actually Canapino had the better weekend, and it's actually slightly disappointing how Canapino's weekend fared out. I believe he out-qualified or not, I might be incorrect in saying that. He actually finished third in the warm-up, which was really impressive from Canapino, and then race 2 he was running pretty well inside the top 10 for a long while of the race, and he said he could even finish in the top 5. I think maybe that might have been a stretch, but he obviously he bumped the ball. It was his error, but we've waxed lyrical about him every week. But his first short oval, and he was really, really impressed again. The results of Chiltern Paving had quite a quiet weekend, but got to say, I think Canapino was particularly impressive yet again.
I was actually struck by sort of how consistent their two drivers were. I think, as you said, Canapino outqualified Ilott for the first race, but only by one position. And I'm pretty sure for the second race, Ilott outqualified Canapino by a single position. Then in the first race,
The other way around.
was it the other way around?
Yeah, I think it was the other way around.
Right. Yeah. So, and then I think in the races, I think the first race was similar to that actually. Yeah, Ilott was one position ahead of Canapino, 15th, 16th. Then 14th in the second race was a solid outcome for Ilott in the end. However, that came after Canapino was, he was running right on the edge of the top 10, and I mean, he told David Land that he felt he could have finished in the top 5, which is quite a statement. I don't know whether I heard that wrong, but I don't think I did. But yeah, he had an impressive weekend. Unfortunately, there was just an error. He hit the wall in the second race, and it didn't look like a fatal hit with the wall in the first place. But then he ended up in the pits, so clearly something wasn't right. But another positive weekend for him. I think he also had an incident in practice actually where he spun out of the pits, but that was on old tyres, which wasn't something that was ever going to happen in the race. So that was kind of meaningless. But yeah, to be on par with Ilott and running ahead of him at times was, fair play to him. That was another really, really impressive weekend within a really impressive season.
I think we'll touch on another guy who's actually impressed yet again, David Malukas. He continues his really good overform. He was very good in Texas. Obviously, Gateway last year, we don't even need to mention. 12th and 8th this weekend. Had qualified very well. I think he was 4th for race 2. I think I'm correct in saying. And the results probably actually a bit underwhelming for Malukas. Yet again, he's really impressed on and oval.
Yeah, I mean, his qualifying was sensational. I think it was 3rd for second race, 9th for the first race. So 2 top 10s after what's been a bit of a strugglesome season for him. But his qualifying run was bold. I mean, it was very flashy. He had a massive wiggle early on the first lap, but he kept his foot in and ended up going provisionally top for both laps at the time, and actually by a decent margin at that stage. And those times managed to hold quite well. I mean, to qualify 9th for the first race after having a massive moment on his lap was quite something. And then to qualify 3rd, he outqualified Josef Newgarden. I mean, Newgarden didn't have the greatest second lap, but to outqualify Josef Newgarden and get amongst the Penskes was quite something for the second race. And yeah, he had some decent results. I don't think he can complain too much with how his races wound up, really. I think he had a slight issue with strategy in the first race, but to finish 12th was still pretty solid, having started 9th. And then, he held on for a while in the second race, actually, and kind of brought the fight to the Penskes for a little stage in the first stint. And, to come away with 8th in that second race and finish ahead of some really accomplished names was rounded off a great weekend for Malukas.
Yeah, I mean, good day for Malukas, as we said, but teammate Ray Robb, it wasn't a great weekend, and I think the ending was a bit embarrassing. Obviously, teams thought it didn't. Actually, his his right wheel, and then he tried to make it back to the pit. Almost definitely did. That almost caused a very, very scary accident when the tyres were in the middle of the track. Thankfully, avoided it, but race control for let's not be having that again. And he was disqualified from the racing. Quite a bizarre incident.
Yeah, I think it was a miscommunication with the team as well. Like you said, it was the pit crew's fault. I think one of them thought that the signal that it was okay, but there was signaling that it wasn't. It's definitely something that shouldn't have happened, and it's definitely not something I would have expected to happen or would have thought of. It's definitely one of them things where they're gonna have to speak about that, and they're definitely gonna be kicking themselves a bit over that, because I can't remember where Rob was running before that, but for something like that to happen, like someone's getting in trouble for that. That should not be happening, no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, I actually did feel very sorry for him because at the end of the day, it's not his fault. But what many people kind of don't acknowledge is that while there is a driver spearheading the team, motorsport is, in essence, a team sport, really. And there was an error from the team, and it could have been really, really bad. I mean, there was proper deja vu for Connor Daly, who was the closest to hitting the tyre from obviously the 2021 Indy 500 when he hit Graham Rahaal's loose tyre, and then Josef Newgarden was quite close to hitting it as well. But yeah, you do feel for Rob, really, obviously, friend of the podcast. Unfortunately, though, he was just quite far adrift all weekend. I think in qualifying, he never found the pace, which, when you compare it to Malukas, there was quite a gulf, wasn't there, really? Obviously, he's a rookie, you have to cut him some slack. It's tough to get used to the ovals, but at the same time, you look at what Malukas was doing on the ovals last year, and it's quite a stark difference. He finished 7 laps down in the first race, I think, in the end. 8 laps down, even. Second race, I don't think was going much better before that. I mean, I still feel like it would be harsh if he was, if the team were to part ways with him at the end of the season. I think, obviously, the first year for a rookie should be a learning year. And, I'm sure Rob is, he's learning valuable things. And I did see a bit of improvement, I think, before the incident yesterday. There was a bit of improvement from the first race, but yeah, it was a massively unfortunate way for his weekend to end.
Yeah, rare disqualification in IndyCar, but I think it's time to move on to the other disqualification, which was Benjamin Pedersen, as we kind of touched on earlier. A few more embarrassing reasons. Really not a good weekend for Benjamin Pedersen. He was 15 laps down in race 1, and then he was parked in race 2 just because he was so slow. And we get it, it's tough for rookies, but standards have to be met, and that is quite embarrassing, I think is the word to use for that.
Brutal. It was really brutal. It's a hard one. I think you do have to pin some of it on Foyt just not performing at all. I mean, you look at the first race, Santino Ferrucci finished 26th and was 9 laps down. He was further adrift than Rob in the first race, and Ferrucci was 5 laps down, finished 22nd in the second race, so that was a bit of improvement, while Pedersen obviously regressed and had the good disqualification. But I don't want to be too harsh on Pedersen just because Ferrucci also struggled so much, and Ferrucci has shown that he's no slouch on ovals, and even Pedersen, you look at the 500 where he performed admirably. I think the team just massively underperformed. They did not bring the package, but yeah, I mean, that's a blow for Pedersen to be parked for lacking pace. I don't know if there was any external issue, some problem with the car or something, but yeah, that's damning.
Yeah, like you said, you can't exactly blame it on on Pedersen. You can't just say it's down to being a rookie, because like I said, if Ferrucci was doing really well, then maybe it can be like, maybe it's an issue with his car. But no, it was like a problem with like the team as a whole. They just didn't have a good weekend, and like you said, they can do really well on ovals. So I don't know, maybe they set up the car a bit differently or something. But whatever they just did not work for them this weekend.
Not great for Foyt. Now we've got 2 teams left to touch on, and you'll see why I've left these 2 teams for the end. But first off, Connor Daly back in IndyCar. I think generically Asbury did kind of see it coming. Blomqvist was never going to run the ovals because he probably isn't going to do it next year. Pagenaud still declared unfit. Connor Daly still with the team in Toronto. Very solid replacement. He didn't have too bad of a weekend, but ironically, he had one incident, and that incident was with the man who took his seat, Ryan Hunter. Particularly ironic, but also particularly funny.
Yeah, I mean, a word on Pagenaud first. I think from what we know, he's he seems fine. He's recovering well. I think it was purely a case of Iowa just not being a great track to return to after evidently some sort of concussion. The heats are massive. There's, it's a physical challenge. Obviously, the G forces and having to hold your breath and time your breath so much. It was not the race for him to return to, especially being a doubleheader as well. But yeah, it was exciting to see Daly named as the replacement again. He's a master of sorts around Iowa. He's had lots of strong qualifying results, and actually, for what it's worth, Meyer Shank came into it having had a quite a strong test at Iowa as well. Daly was up near the top of the order just after the halfway mark in practice. It looked like he was getting up to speed quite quickly. I think he was maybe a little bit disappointed with qualifying. It wasn't awful. It wasn't, his standout top 5 finishes in qualifying that he's had in the past. I think race 1, by all accounts, he was having a good run, but unfortunately got scuppered a bit by a yellow and just got trapped. And that stopped him from competing when he said he had the pace for around the top 10. But misery in that race, as you said, was then later compounded by having a coming together with the 20 car. I've not seen any footage. I don't know if there is any footage available anywhere. I would like to see the footage, but I think Daly was trying to pass Hunter Ray up high, and by Daly's account, apparently he just got completely cut off and pushed into the wall by Hunter Ray. I think in Daly's words, he flat out ran me into the wall. And, he said it's probably not malicious, but it's oddly ironic. And yeah, it's unfortunate. There were words exchanged in the pits after that first race. And yeah, I'm desperate to see footage of it, really. I want to see what happened.
It's funny because Conor Daly's now had 3 races back with Meyer Shank because of Pagenaud's injury. And the only car he's been involved in an accident with is the number 20, which obviously was his seat up until Detroit. Very funny. So I'd love to see an instant of it, but it's just very ironic.
And it's also interesting to point out that he outperformed the 20 car, which usually does go fairly well at Iowa. Obviously, Ryan Hunter-Reay is, almost up there with Newgarden in terms of drivers that have really excelled at Iowa. But I think it does still emphasise that what was that decision from Ed Carpenter Racing, really?
Yeah.
I mean, Daly, I think he outqualified the 20 car for race 2. He finished above him in both races, above Hunter-Reay in both races, as far as I'm aware.
Crashed out in race 2.
Yes, that's another good point. Yeah, I mean, Daly finished 17th in the second race, I think, after a 21st in the first race. So not great results, but he seemed to have pace and he seemed fairly comfortable. And I think he did a fairly admirable job in a car that he's not really driven on an oval before. Never driven on an oval before the weekend.
Yeah. Castro Neves, actually, his teammate, also had a pretty decent weekend by his standards, 14th or 16th. That was second best result after Texas for the 14th. So decent effort from him. Obviously, we think we know he's going to the end of the career, but it's always good to see him have good results. Looking at ECR, pretty quiet weekend. VK 17th and 18th, pretty poor weekend. The Carpenter ended up 24th in race 1 and 23rd in race 2. Yeah,
Carpenter's an interesting one to point out because he qualified. He qualified fourth
really
for the
well.
second race. He was the first to run as well in qualifying, and his second lap held up remarkably. Yet he dropped down to 23rd. I've no idea what really happened because it was, it was two really poor races for Carpenter and just for the team in general. It was another wretched weekend in a wretched season.
Anyway, I've got one more point for the weekend. And I think Iowa Speedway really put on a good show, and I think Ed Sheeran starting the race was a very, very cool sight. Well done, Hy-Vee. Well done, Iowa Speedway. Well done, IndyCar.
Well done, Ed Sheeran, as well, because he genuinely looked like he was having the time of his life. He was enjoying it, massively. I think they said on the broadcast as well. He requested to he requested to speak with Roger Penske as well, because he's an IndyCar fan apparently, which I didn't know. I mean, apparently he's been an F1 fan for a while, but having that sort of person, that sort of profile of person at a race, and I think he posted a video on his socials as well, about having waved the flag. I mean, brilliant.
So second big for them just seem like really massive IndyCar fans. Oh, anything more, particularly when you compare it to some like F1, and just we've had two massive days bring so much time to the grid as IndyCar fans, which is exactly what we want. One, it brings in all, and two, we just have people just loving the race.
I mean, you also had three other, fairly large artists in terms of over in the US, obviously less known to us, but Carrie Underwood's quite a big name. She was, I think she had some sort of sponsor on the side of Connor Daly's car as well. And again, on her social medias, there were pictures of being at the race, which was great. There was who else? Zach Brown Band and Kenny Chesney as well. So they're big names over in the States. So it's great for the sport. And credit to Hy-Vee for the weekend that they've put on. I love the Iowa weekend, and I'm very sad now that it's over.
Yeah, I mean, they've said in the broadcast multiple times, 2021, Iowa was almost a derelict speedway, and Hy-Vee have done a brilliant job bringing it back, and not only bringing it back as a great doubleheader weekend, but all these musical attractions as well. And gotta say, might be one of my favourite weekends of the year after the Indy 500. So well done, Hy-Vee. Cracking event, and I can't wait for next year. Hopefully, it's a bit more unpredictable though.
Yeah, but I actually think it speaks to how good a racing product, the track gives us, that despite it being, predictable, Newgarden winning, that it's actually still really engaging and really enjoyable. I thought that both the races were really fun, even though, I mean, by lap 31 in the second race, it's like, oh, great, foregone conclusion, Newgarden's going to win. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and roll on Iowa next year.
Absolutely agreed. Couldn't agree more. There we go. That's Iowa done. Brilliant weekend. Dare I say it, next race might be the opposite. We're going to the Music City Grand Prix for Nashville. If there's anything like the last 2 years, we're in for quite the race, let's say. From previous events, we've kind of been talking about this race for 3 or 4 episodes now. We don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be the most unpredictable event of the year. I mean, where do you even start? It's going to be bonkers.
Can we all try and predict a winner?
Yes, let's go for it.
I'll just have a moment to think. But it's just going to be a wild guess, because it could be anyone.
Felix Rosenqvist.
Marcus Armstrong. Marcus Armstrong's going to win.
Oh, we're going out there like that. Let me think. I'm trying.
I didn't actually predict Rosenqvist in my mid-year review, so it's really brave from me.
Or I feel like, someone like Graham Rahal. You see how well they performed at Toronto.
Story and a half. Yeah.
Rahal, Armstrong, Iowa to 3 that I'm going to say, just to go a bit out there. I think we could get an unexpected winner. Yeah, go for 3. That's probably best.
Rosenqvist, Herta, or let's go Grosjean.
Go for what is it? Little Dave. Should I go with David Malukas? See if that could happen.
Yeah, go for it.
Go for him. I don't know who else. What is it? Should I go for Power for another one? Because why not? I don't know, and you can pick me a third one.
It'll probably be Palou.
Yeah. After Palou victory with Dixon second and McLaughlin third. In the quietest Nashville you've ever seen. So off week next week, we're going to have a bit of a different episode discussing some changes we'd make to IndyCar. Just as a bit of a one-off episode whilst we wait for Nashville to roll around. Then we'll have an episode on Nashville, and after that we're pretty much flat out until the end of the season. They are their drop rival recap 2 into 1. Brilliant weekend, as we said. Really enjoyable, and we can't wait to go there next year. Thanks for listening. I do apologise for audio isn't great. I'm literally an out of willpower grew up, so please do excuse me. Hopefully you'll see us on the channel soon. Have a good one, and we'll see you next time.